Alright, let's get this demo started. Well, continue anyways. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about BSPs as a whole. BSPs are binary space partitions. They are not considered geometry. BSPs are specifically for the purpose, and I'm going to apologize right now on behalf of Epic Games. For you Unity users, I envy your company's ability to make good, usable, and user-friendly level design tools while also being terrible at everything else. I stand by that. I think Unity has fallen off the wagon. I think Unity needs to get on therapy. But Unreal still provides what a lot of engines also provide is a rudimentary format to assemble meshes in a way that is usable for prototyping levels and for testing out tools like scale, etc., etc. Because we're going to be making this today, I'm going to show you guys how to make these elements. Now, I am going to show you how to make the pointy top and how to add thickness and all this stuff. I'll show you guys all of that in a little bit, but we need to start with the basics. BSPs are not for shipping. Let me go ahead and actually bring one into the world. We can take a look at it. This is what it looks like when you're bringing in a BSP. And this is what it looks like when you drop it down. As you can see, a BSP has a details panel that's very different from some of the other details panels. It doesn't have a whole lot to work with. We have the ability to select individual faces. We have the ability to select the object as a whole. And if we select, let me go ahead and hit escape so I can actually, that way you're like, you can actually control click the faces, and those selections, I wish they were a little darker, but those selections are critical to what is happening in the brush itself. We have the ability to, let me go ahead and click on this object again and then click off it and click through the block brush. You can see we have the ability to change its brush type, its shape, its X, Y, and Z values, whether it's hollow, and whether or not it's tessellated, which means whether or not it's divided diagonally. And that's about it for the default brush at the top level. When we select the faces, however, or if we select, for example, the brush as a whole, you can see the entire brush got selected, we have access to different elements underneath what it does. Let's go ahead and start by selecting a face here. Or actually, yeah, let's start by selecting a face. We have the ability to modify the surface. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I'm not going to encourage you guys to. What that means is if you apply a texture, you can pan it in the U or V direction, which is X or Y. You can also rotate the face, or you can flip the face over, or change its scale. You can also change the light map resolution in here, and BSPs have their own light mask settings in here. Let me go ahead and unfurl this so we can get a better look at what's happening in here. So they are essentially different to most geometry and most static meshes inside of UE4. Don't worry about replication, just ignore that. We also have access to the brush settings as a whole while we have an individual face selected. Now these brush settings apply to the entire mesh. It's not even a mesh, to the entire brush. If I say mesh, just assume I'm talking about the BSP brush. But generally speaking, BSPs are not meshes. They don't work that way. We have the ability to change its scaling. If we have the ability to use hollowness, we can change the wall thickness. We also have some ability to change whether it's solid, semi-solid, or non-solid. We have the ability to change the order of the BSPs, and this is going to be important later when I show you guys this. This allows us to align the vertices if we've really messed with the way that the BSP looks. And we have the button that allows us to select this brush and create a static mesh from it, from our selections. Once it's created a static mesh, it can be exported into Maya. We don't have to worry about the actor conversion here. That'll be fine. And we're going to talk about the brush shape here shortly. We don't have to worry about LOD or cooking because it doesn't actually do anything for us. So let's go ahead and start by playing around a little bit with some materials that we made, or that we imported earlier. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to a BSP materials so that we know what they are. Because this guy has his own materials folder and I don't want to get confused. Let's go ahead and, if we're following along the example, we would probably apply, if this was non-traversable, or if it was a standard object. Let's pretend it's going to be like an object the character can see. It's going to be replaced with a statue or something. Let's go ahead and drag the blue color out onto it. Does everybody see that only applied it to that one face? I'm going to Control Z that, and I'm going to make sure that this is just a bare selection, and I'm just going to try it again. See? It applies it only to the face that is selected when you are adding a mesh, or rather adding a material element to the object, which allows you to add different elements to each individual face. We can go ahead and continue to do that until we run out of colors. Now, the way that this is designed is that this mesh and the way that the UI is designed, and because we have a floor here, I'm going to go ahead and apply my material to my floor here. So let me go ahead and select my floor. And then I'm going to just have two materials on it. Let's see what I want to do. We've got two kinds of materials on here, so I'll just there we go. So now we have a floor that we can actually utilize. So that'll be our floor. Now you guys might be wondering, what if we need to pan this or anything? How does it tile? We actually don't have to worry about that. The way that the texture is made, it's always going to look reasonably good on any surface. That's why I like using these. They work because they automatically detect the world size, and they just look really good, and they line up in almost every capacity. They look really good, and a little bit of color never hurts when you're designing. So that is what it is. Let's go ahead and go back to the BSP here. So as you can see, our BSP has multiple elements applied on different surfaces. Now, as I said earlier, BSPs are not for final. BSPs are actually incredibly expensive and incredibly difficult to render for the engine when you start creating large, obscenely large versions of them. Let's go ahead and drag another BSP box out, but let's go ahead and have a color pre-selected, and let's drag that out. How nifty is that? So when you drag out an object, it automatically has a material that you have selected, especially when you're using geometry. When you're using the BSPs, they should call this BSPs, but they've always called it geometry. We'll apply the texture that you have initially selected in the browser, which makes this process incredibly easy when you are trying to make a certain type of object or a certain type of mesh object, so on and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and showcase a quick application of some textures as well. So let's say we want to apply the yellow material to this entire object here. This should be our floor, but whatever. Let's go ahead and apply the yellow material. We can, in fact, go ahead and change a few things. We don't actually have to worry about alignment because our texture is world aligned. It's designed that way. But if you are putting a texture on a surface of an object, those are your presets right over there. planar, planar wall, planar floor, align surface box, and align surface fit. They don't always cooperate with what you want. So if you apply a texture, let me go ahead and find the mannequin's texture. And I'll apply that. We can change the alignment very quickly on those surfaces. Now, it won't work for these textures because these textures are world aligned. It does not matter what you do to them. They will always look this way, which is why I like designing with these textures, because they are never wrong. They will always look good. So the other thing that we can do with our texture here is or rather with our object here, is if we have a face selected, we can also select a variety of different subtypes. Now they each have their own hotkey. I have gone between learning them and knowing them all, and then forgetting all of them because they don't have a real rhyme or reason. I use a tool to help me do level design stuff. Let me show you that. I'm not going to show you the tool. Let's see. There it is. I use the level design toolkit myself, which has a lot of really interesting editors and a lot of usability to kind of help me make the things that I need to make immediately. This is typically what I'll use. It costs a little bit of money, but I've always enjoyed it. It might be depreciated at some point, but it works for me. Other people will use other tools. Let me see if I can find something. There's a few tools that are available. There's a level design toolkit. I know there's another toolkit, unless it got taken down. Sometimes if tools go underutilized or unupdated, they will not be updated for you guys. Let's see here. Let's see if I can find them here. I've got a lot of tools that I've used in the past. If I can't see it here shortly, I'm just going to move on. There's level design toolkit. This one's pretty good. The Blockout Tools plugin is actually still very useful. I don't believe it's free. It was free for a little bit, but this is one of the nicer tools that allow you to make a blockout category. It works a little bit better for some people than others, but I'm not going to make you guys use it. Obviously, tools don't make you better. It's knowing when you need to use a tool that makes you better. So if you learn just basic BSPs and you find that that's not good enough for what you're trying to do, these tools are incredibly useful for what you're trying to accomplish as well. I'm going to go ahead and close it. Oh, didn't mean to do that. There we go. So for example, we can select the rest of the brush by going to select the surfaces belonging to the same brush as the selected surfaces. We can also select the matching material. For example, if we apply this material over here and then we select matching material, we see that it selects everything that's matched to that material, including the side over there. See, this is selected as well. Let's go back to selecting that one. We also have our surface selection. Sorry about that. Which will select other adjacent, or rather touching surfaces. Go back up here. Anything on the same plane. any adjacent walls, so they're anything vertical and upright, or any slanted surfaces within reason. Now, I find that these other three typically don't always work. They're supposed to save you time on your selections. This is your invert selection. So if you have one thing selected and then select invert, it will select... Oh, yeah, actually, did they change that? Hold on a sec. What did they do with that? Oh, invert surface selection. It used to be invert selection. So whatever surface that you have selected, it will invert it. So if you have a surface selected and you select your inversion, since we have all the same surface here, it selects everything. So instead of having a single face selected, it will select everything else. So since we have a single face selected, invert selected, it selects everything in there. Not an ideal tool. You can memorize it, kind of like how you can memorize a selection. You can recall that memory. And then, of course, there's some program. This is OR, and XOR for those of you who are programmers. I have never used these. So basically, these are your ands, your ors, and your not-nots. Sorry, the tamale guy's back. I have never used these successfully. I think they just put them in there to let people have a selection surface, especially when it deals with memory. I don't really worry about all this. Everything can be accomplished with left click. This just saves you a little bit of time. I already talked about surface properties. I can actually show that with the mannequin material. We can see rotate. We can flip the UV. We can change the scale. So on and so forth. I'm not going to cover lighting. You guys should already know what this stuff is. And then it also adheres to the stuff inside the light mask settings, but this is some extra stuff that you get from the BSP. Let's go ahead, and I'm just going to go back to BSP material, and I'm just going to reapply that blue up here so we can get that cleaned up. All right. Let's go ahead and grab the, I'll grab this little guy right here. I'll move him over a little bit. So as you can see, when you move things, it does the cutout and does not actually physically move the object. So what you're doing is you're basically creating an object in an empty space in the world. That's where it gets a little bit more complicated. Now, unlike traditional 3D modeling, it is generally not a good idea to scale BSPs. Watch what happens to these values. See this X, Y, and Z? I'm just going to scale this bad boy up. Notice how my X, Y, and Z values are still the same. They're still set at 200. Scaling BSPs is something I generally discourage because scaling BSPs causes issues with some of the surfaces sometimes when you are starting to get into the weeds of working and combining BSPs. Scaling a BSP will really have a weird interaction with these numbers because what you're doing is you're scaling the interaction of this. So instead of it actually being 200, your actual value is something like 3.75 times 200 to give you the overall value over here. Once you have modified the value of the scale of an object, it becomes very difficult to tell in unit size how large your BSP is because the scale does not line up with the BSP brush size. So what does that mean? I generally encourage people to start, at least at first, by modifying the brush settings and not scaling your mesh. Scaling your mesh can be dangerous. It becomes dangerous when we go to our modes panel over here and we go to our brush editing and then we select that edge and let's say we want to extrude that edge or make an extension to that edge. You see that none of these values are edited. It is okay to edit a mesh. I'm going to back that off. But as you can see, that is not saved anywhere. Where is this saved now that we've changed the size? I'll do an extrusion. Oh, only local chords. Sorry. So there, we made an extrusion. Does anyone see that the scale and the brush settings don't update? This is why it gets a little scary. How do you know how big this brush is now? You don't. You don't know. That's why. This is why we have the mannequin. Because the mannequin is supposed to be usable for our scale once we start modifying our BSPs to the point where we actually start flying off of the scale and flying off of the brush settings values. This is why it's really important to have a reference when you are using BSPs. I'll talk about the extrude or the brush editing mode later. Let's go ahead and experiment with some of these BSPs. I'm going to go ahead and Control W this bad boy over here. I'm going to move this over here. And I'm also going to move my post-processing volume into the background here. I'm also going to go ahead and scale my Z to about 500, and we have to move this up a little bit. You can press N to get it to stop down, and then we can do the same thing with our other values. Cool. I'm now going to go ahead and grab another one of these. I'm going to Control W, and we're going to bring this in. And I am simply just going to place this somewhere like so. And I'm going to get close to the center. I don't care if it's exactly midpoint, but I'm going to get close. And I am going to go ahead and I'm going to extend this bad boy on X until we've intersected all the way through. Let's go ahead and change our brush type now from additive to subtractive. And now let's go ahead and move that brush. We have this brush selected. I'm going to deselect this floor here. I'm going to rename this to just cut out, just so I don't lose it. So we have our box brush. I'm going to rename this to cut box, and then we have our cut out. If I move my cut out, does everybody see how that updated? Yep. That is how BSPs work. BSPs are just forms in space that allow you to cut out or bring in what is a space that is designated as it looks like geometry, but it is not geometry. And that's where it becomes critical that you guys understand what is happening with your shapes here. Once you start modifying or scaling your shapes outside of the default brush settings is where your brush editing can make things a little bit more difficult. Because now, as you can see, I can edit this brush, but it doesn't acknowledge that intrusion right there. This cutout, same thing. If I select this cutout, I can, under the modes panel, go into the brush editing. What it does is it edits your brushes. You can edit your brushes using the brush editing tool. That's what this is for. This is not a geometry editing tool. This edits brushes. Anything that shows up like this is considered a brush. Anything that shows up like this, if you look at the icon, it looks like a box, but with like a little icon next to it, but it's got a little blue edge to it. Those are brushes, and they are going to be denoted as brushes or volumes, as you can see over on the world outliner, which means that you can edit them. Obviously, if we deselect, we get the object being permanent. So how do we reselect that? Funnily enough, we either guess by clicking in the correct area, or I like to name my BSPs so my BSPs don't have to deal with, so I don't have to deal with searching for my BSPs. I'm going to go back to select mode so that we have everything that we had previously. Now that we have this cutout set up, go figure, we can actually apply materials to our mesh. To quickly apply a material, have your material selected, left click the object, hold down shift, and left click again. Left click the face, and left click again. Now, big question. Are we coloring the inside of this box, or are we coloring this brush? We are actually just coloring this brush, but we can't tell. This cutout is going to affect any brushes that have those values attached to them. See that orange is being rendered on there, and there's that white? So because we've applied texture to the cutout, so to speak, to our subtractive brush, the subtractive properties are being applied to the newly exposed faces from this brush. If we move this brush, it's easy to see that the cutout does not go with it. To combine a brush with its subtractiveness, or rather with its subtracted brush, it's a good idea to, you can't attach them. Most people will try to attach brushes. You cannot attach them to each other. However, if you select them with Control click and then hit Control G, these are now grouped. Objects with that green outline or that green border like so are grouped. Grouped objects are moved together. I cannot individually select one or the other. And this might get a little bit sketchy. Rotating does work, but only if you don't mess with the scaling too much. If you mess with the scaling, it is entirely possible to find yourself in a situation where you rotate an object and the scale of its rotation are affected, which is why it's really important to understand that your first line of defense against that is not modifying your scale or not modifying your scale or your rotational values too soon. You want to get the scale as close as you possibly can by using the tools available to you. Now, if I need to edit these brushes, I can just hit Shift G to ungroup them, and then I have access to the brushes again, which is actually pretty easy to work with. You can also use more than one cutout, or rather, more than one subtractive brush. Let me make sure I'm still recording here. Yep, everything looks good. I'm going to Control W this cutout. I'm just going to place it up there. So now, as you can see, they are interacting. Now, I am subtracting two objects. The more you subtract objects, the more brushes that you stack, the weirder that things can get. Let's see if I can get this to actually do this. Sometimes it's a little bit weird. So we've got our box here. Okay. So even though we have these brushes involved, this box brush isn't affected. This is where your order of operations really comes into play. Let's see if I can get it to work. There we go. Changing the order of where the brush is supposed to be absolutely affects the way that your brush renders. you have to know what order you're going to be moving them into. Moving it to first or to last. I almost never use the merge or separate. I just don't. The one that I spend a lot of time with is solidity, and I'll explain solidity right now. Before I get into solidity, let me talk about order real quick. So the order in that brushes are placed is extremely important, like I explained, and like you're seeing right now. The order in which they're placed does matter, because it's the actions are order of operations based. They're performed according to this order. So placing a subtractive brush and then placing an additive brush will not have the same effect as placing an additive brush and then a subtractive brush, even if they're in the exact same locations. So if you subtract from empty space and then add on top of that, the subtractive brush is going to be ignored, right? Because you can't subtract from nothing. However, if you place those brushes in the opposite order, you're adding empty space to an object, you're carving space out of it. So that's where the order comes in, as far as brush surfaces are concerned. Let's talk about solidity. So solidity, let me move this guy over here. Solidity is where brushes can be solid. This is your collision. Brushes can be solid, somewhat solid, or not solid. And what it means is whether or not it collides with objects in the world, and whether the BSP will whether or not the BSP brushes causes BSP cuts to be created in the surrounding area when building your geometry. So what does that mean? Solid is the default. Solid brushes are when you create any kind of brush, it will be solid. They block players and projectiles, they can be additive or subtractive, and they create cuts in everything. Semi-solid brushes are colliding brushes that can be placed at a level without creating cuts to the world geometry. These can be used to create things like pillars and support beams, though such objects are normally created with static meshes, right? Semi-solids will block players and projectiles, just like solid brushes do. However, semi-solids can only be additive. Meaning that if your object is only additive and you know it's going to be replaced with a mesh, you may want to set your object to semi-solid. Or solid kind of solves everything. Can't be subtractive. And it doesn't create cuts in the surrounding brushes. A non-solid, non-solids are non-colliding brushes and they don't create cuts in anything. They have the effect of being visible but unable to be interacted with. They don't block people, or excuse me, they can be visible, not invisible. They can be visible, but they're not interactable. They don't block players or projectiles. They can only be additive and never subtractive. And they don't create cuts in the surrounding brushes. So if you don't know what any of that means, I would strongly encourage experimenting to understand what each of them do. I typically leave everything solid unless I know exactly that an object that is going to be non-solid. It's just ways to kind of add a little bit more complexity to your meshes. Let me give you a hint here, guys and gals. Look at how weird that shows up. Don't overthink it. BSPs are not supposed to be meshes. Or rather, BSPs are not supposed to be static meshes. BSPs are used purely for prototyping. I know, sweetheart. Are used purely for prototyping. And because they're used for prototyping, they are predominantly throwaway. The more time that you spend messing with throwaway assets, the more time you're going to waste. So, when you are putting together something like this, it is important to keep in mind what is your goal for when you are putting together or working with BSPs. Your goal should be to quick and dirty put together a level with scale in mind, with layout and complexity in mind, as soon as possible, without running into any fundamental issues with your modeling of your BSPs. Yes, once you get it to a certain point, it is okay to just start scaling, to just start messing with things. The problem with scaling, however, so we have our cutout box and we have our two cutouts, is that once you start scaling, things can get very, very strange. As the scaling of things is not always uniform. It's going to be easy because these boxes are all uniform scaled, right? But once you start scaling, as you can see, does everybody see how the texture stretches when I scale it? Or rather, the texture would scale, sorry. The texture gets stretched properly when we do scale it, but we have a world-aligned texture. If we were to apply a regular material, we'd see that the texture gets stretched out. Without this material makes BSP modeling very, very easy for students to learn because you're not worried about your texture stretching. Okay? It's critical to keep in mind what you are doing whenever you are doing it in UE4 so that you have a plan going in. If you just start making tons of edits, you're going to run into problems. Let me go ahead and actually start making some edits here. So let's go ahead and go into the modes panel, and I'm going to go into the brush editing mode. Now I'm going to select my box brush here, which is my cutout box, and I'm going to show what you can actually do with your brush editing mode. Brush editing mode allows you to change the faces very similar to where if you were scaling or modeling an object in Maya or Max, except the problem is it does not show up in any of the values that you can edit over in the details panel. This is where it gets incredibly scary. You always want to be careful before you start modifying your brushes that you have everything set up according to what you want it to be. When you start editing brushes, you start adding edits that the engine does not track because this engine is not a modeling engine. It doesn't, as a 4.26, it does have the ability to do some basic 3D modeling with static meshes and polygons, but I'm going to tell you right now, it doesn't work the way that you would expect. Alright, so one of the first things that I like to do is, let me have a face selected here. So I have face selected. Let me make sure that I have the face actually selected. Extrude is just a simple tool. It moves the selector geometry forward, creating new geometry behind it. Yes, this is going to show up, but that's just warning you that it only works with local coordinates, meaning that it only works off of these coordinates, but only locally, meaning that they don't show up whatsoever. Oh, I'm still extruding, sorry. If we still have this selected, this will just be another extrusion. And as you can see, as we continue to extrude, we can continue to apply. Oh, we can go back to edit mode. Or actually, we need to go back to place mode. Select mode here. You can see that we can apply different materials to each individual extrusion. Each individual extrusion is treated as a supplement to the already existing geometry of the brush. If we go back into our brush editing mode and just have edit selected, all we can do with the edit selected, make sure we have our face selected, make sure that your move is following along. This is not an extrusion. This is an extrusion, but what it's doing is all it does is it changes the relative height and position of that particular shape. So what this does is it allows you to select the faces directly and allows you to manipulate those faces directly, whereas an extrusion is a physical cut and an extrusion from that location. See? Go back into edit. I don't believe we can, yeah, we actually can't apply a texture from there. We don't have to go into place mode. So you can see what's going on. We cannot use the shift-click shortcut to apply materials, and in order to do that, we have to go to select, and then we can select the face and then shift-click. I believe they actually fixed that, though. Let me see if I can get it to do it. left click, shift click. Nope, it looks like we can't use that trick when we are inside the mesh editing or brush editing. But if we go to select mode, we can do it. Shift left click. So you can see that you can make some relatively simple, if not at least internally complex BSP shapes, which means we can now make an extrusion from here So if we extend that, obviously we extend the shape. But if we make an extrusion, we can make a physical extrusion. And we can make some semi-complex shapes using this method. Be very careful, because at this point, imagine trying to scale something that has non-consistent deformer scale, right? We can set up and see if I can get this to work. Sometimes it'll let us, sometimes it won't. As you can see, it won't let me. You can't scale an extrusion. It gets a little bit weird when you do, but you can scale its result, if that makes sense. You can't scale to an extrusion, but you can scale the result. All right. Let's go ahead and go back into select mode. I keep calling this place mode. It used to be called place mode, but now it's select. And we can showcase some of the other ones. For example, if we change our properties down here, for example, select the sphere and hit subtract. It doesn't save it. It's a per object basis. I bring in a sphere, move it down. You can see how the object gets cut. And this brush can also have its own properties as well. Now in this particular case, I want to go ahead and select all those faces. Whoops. Let's select our brush face here, select adjacent surfaces, and now let's apply our texture. So as you can see, it's very easy to denote spaces where the texture can apply. And of course, if we need to change the alignment, this probably won't have a result. Like a very mild result. You saw that it had like it just relaxed a little bit. You can change it. Also, because we have access to this brush, we can change things like its tessellation. We can make it smoother. But as you can see, as it redraws, it needs a texture reapplied. So obviously I can select the face, select the adjacent surfaces, and then apply the material to it. And then select an alignment that's going to work. We can still see some of the tessellation, but as you can see, it's doing its best, which is good enough, right? It's good enough. I'm going to go ahead and make another box to kind of demonstrate some of the other elements here. I'm going to Control W this box here. I'm going to move this over here. Cool. Let's check for hollowness. I'm going to turn on hollowness. And it doesn't really mean anything, but as you can see, if we turn on hollowness, we now have an interior. Let me go ahead and grab another box. I am going to scale that on Y to be maybe 100. Actually, more like 50. I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to scale my X to be 250 to be longer in the box. And it's already set to subtractive because my default is set subtractive over here. I know, sweetheart. Hold on, guys. I've got to deal with a kitten. Sorry about that, guys. Kitten problems. So as we can see, we're editing this brush based on the original cutouts that we've made. Oh, it looks like we have some some color applied so we can apply the color appropriately. It's a little bit tough sometimes to hit the right mark. But now that we have this brush face selected, let's select this face. Let's select all adjacent surfaces, and then let's correctly apply a color that we can see. Oh, let's apply the blue. Let's display the two materials, and we'll just place the blue over. That'll override that. Awesome. So we can see kind of what's happening inside here. So because this box is hollow, this main box brush is hollow. Because we've set its hollowness, we can actually increase its internal thickness by applying more thickness. See how that works? And that's pretty straightforward. Now, I'm not going to teach too many of the modeling modes. I am going to cover the very basics of them because I think they're important to know. Let me double check to make sure that's on the agenda. Yeah, I just checked. It's on the bill. Okay, we'll cover a couple more things. And then I'll think about wrapping this up. What are we at? We're at 45 minutes. That's pretty good. Got another 20 or so minutes left. Yeah, that's about right. So you can see that there's a lot that you can do. Let's go ahead and I'm going to bring in another box. I'm going to switch back to additive. I'm going to do box. This will be a static mesh. So I'm going to immediately change my, let's do this 100. We'll do it 500 units tall. Move this up. I'm going to hit N to bring it down. And we'll do 500 units wide. It's a little easier to work with when you actually know your unit sizes. Actually, let's change our Y and set it to like 250. 300? 350, something a little wider. There we go, something like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab I think maybe a cylinder, a sphere, probably a cylinder. Let's grab a cylinder. I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees immediately. You can rotate safely. It's usually pretty safe to rotate. Mess with the outer radius here. Let's try to get these lined up properly. So I'm going to go ahead and go into back mode here. Is that correct? Yep. So I'm going to try to get these lined up properly. Okay. Perspective mode. Okay, so that's bifurcated or bisected pretty okay. I'm going to shift its... it's important to decide whether something is going to be hollow or vice versa before you do it. I'll show you guys why later. I'm also going to add this. Let's add 32 sides here. And I'm going to do subtractive. Cool. Okay. So let's go ahead and move this down a little bit. I'm trying to make like an archway. Let's go ahead and mess with the outer radius so we get something a little bit thicker maybe. 150. 100. Might be too small. Okay, I might live with that. Move that up here. I'll grab box. Probably move that to subtractive immediately. And we'll move this up here, down with end. I'll go back into back mode here so I can get it lined up with everything else. That's about right. If not, I'll just wing it. Let's go back to perspective mode. Let's move this in. Should immediately give us something to work with. Let's go ahead and widen it a little bit more. Trying to get something a little bit more well placed. So let's go ahead and widen it on the Y. Doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good enough. It's pretty good. Widened it a little bit. And let's extend it on the Z, probably 250. Actually, probably 350, just to get it a little bit straighter. A little bit too tall, but that's fine. Move down a little more. See where our sphere midpoint is. Probably around there. That's good enough. And then this will probably be laid out like so. We'll select that face, select adjacent surfaces. Actually, we'll just coplanar. Oh, it's on a different object here, so I'm going to have to... Oh, let's apply this material like that. Select that face, select adjacent surfaces. We'll apply material there. Do that again over here. And then we have a kind of an archway, you know, something that you can make. And so you're only limited by your inherent ability to kind of figure out what you want to do. And if we go back to this box, we can widen it out on Y, so we can widen it out a little bit more to kind of make this a little bit wider. So we've got a 500 piece here. And then when we're done, we combine all of these together. We group them with Control G. And then now I have a nice little template that I can reuse over and over to make whatever I need. There's my castle wall. Or like my aqueducts or whatever. So you can actually make quite a bit if you sit down and kind of figure out what strategy you want to use for any of these. And if you know they're getting a little wide, we can always move them in a little bit. Narrow them down a little bit. See, you can make just about anything that you need as long as you know where to make your cuts and where things are supposed to be. And just remember that it's not supposed to be perfect, ladies and gentlemen. It's not a perfect science. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be just for place holding tools, like you guys saw in the example. I'll cover this more in the next class, not the next class for 160, but 162, because this is when we start getting into the level design and the level creation tools, and it's going to be important that I show you guys how to make this. But let's go ahead and bring all this back. All this, I got all this stuff here. I'm just going to move this over, rotate it. You can do that, but wow, let's see, scaling gets a little bit weird. As you can see, scaling can be a little bit strange, but generally speaking, once you group things and once they're put together properly, you can see that everything just kind of comes together. Let's move that over there. I don't want to move it off the thing here. The last thing I want to talk about is pivot pointing. Now, obviously, you see that it's very difficult to snap things perfectly to the grid if you don't set up your pivot points. Typically speaking, when I bring in a box, if I'm going to be modifying it to be something like an aqueduct thing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it up into the air, and I'm going to get as close as I can to the corner that I want. I'm going to make sure that the object is selected. I'm going to right-click. Oh, I'm not trying to right-click that. I'm trying to right-click so I don't get that. Right-click so you get this menu. We want to move the pivot, and then I can do set pivot offset here, snapped. And if you do it right, it should be permanent. It should be set to that corner. Now, once you have that pivot selected, it's okay to go into your orthographic view. So I'll go into back view so I can see it. So that's my pivot that's selected right there. It's over the character, so I'm going to select the character and hide him for now. Make sure everything is showing up. Oh. Are we still in the right mode? Yeah, we are. Okay, we're okay. The annoying thing is, there we go. So once we have this selected, let me select that edge. Go into the brush editing mode here. Select that vertex. It's important to remember to set your pivot as the offset. Let's go back into, not select mode, let's go back into perspective mode. Oh, I selected the wrong one. I selected from the back. Whoops. Let's go ahead and redo that. I'm going to go here. I'm going to pivot. Set pivot offset here. Snap. Oh, see, it snapped to the wrong pivot. This is why it's important to get it as close as possible. Right here. There we go. Good enough. Now, once that's set up, see, it reset when I set it up. Once you get it set up properly, it works pretty well. So let's try to establish where our back is. So this is going to be our back over here. It's going to be important that we have the correct pivot selected. So if we're facing this way on X, let's go ahead and change our perspective to back. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and select this vertex. Now, if that vertex is selected correctly, I can right-click it. It might have changes, which is why I'm going to set. Let me reset the pivot offset first. I'm going to select this corner here. I'm going to right-click the corner, moved off of it, right-click, and then I'm going to set the pivot offset here. Actually, you know what? Let's set a pivot offset. So when we go back into our perspective view, our pivot is now permanently set. Set pivot offset here is just temporary. So what we have done is, let me right-click pivot, let me reset it. It's a little bit harder to do it in perspective mode because, it's, as you can see, it's very chintzy and kind of weird to try to get that selected. It's important to understand where forward and back is. So if we look at the x-axis in the bottom left, we're facing forward. So front is this way, back is this way. So I'm going to go ahead and find the mannequins so we'll actually set them up properly so that we know our locations. So that way we know this is the correct facing direction. So if I'm going to be making something like this so that I know it always snaps correctly to the right location, as you can see, this is not snapping because our center point is set in the middle of the object, and any slightly miscalculated rotations are not going to work. We need to set our pivot correctly. So in order to set our pivot, it's the easiest to go to the correct perspective. Make sure you select the face. Right-click the vertex that you want to assign so that your object is selected. Right-click the background, go to pivot, and then set as pivot offset. I have a hotkey set for it, Control-P. Reset pivot offset resets it to the center of the actor, however the engine installed it. Set pivot offset here sets the pivot to that location, but only until you click it. Once you click it off, it's gone. And set pivot offset here, snapped, tries to snap to the checked location. It tries. You can also set the pivot on center selection. Generally speaking, once I have my pivot in the correct place, I will set as pivot offset, and then I'll go back to my perspective view, and every time I click off, my snaps will be correct. See how we're rotating around this corner now? So it's almost now impossible for me to not be able to place this correctly because the pivot is based on an actual location on a vertex. What I didn't do over here is set that. So all these boxes, because their center points are placed incorrectly, they can be problematic. For example, now that we have a pivot over here, oh, I didn't grab the thing. Let's grab you both, let's group you both. So I don't want to edit both these objects while they're grouped, so I'm going to ungroup them. I'm going to make sure that the correct object is selected. I'm going to go into the back view, make sure this one's selected. I'm going to right-click the pivot that I want, click the background, pivot, set as pivot offset, and now when I go back to perspective mode, if I select these two objects, I believe a grouped object pivot doesn't actually count that, but I believe we can set that as well. Let's see if it'll let us. I believe they changed that. Select that off, right click, we can. Pivot, set as pivot. It might be trying to reset. This is one of the things that I think was on a wish list. Pivot. Okay, it looks like it's ignoring the pivot. So this might not be possible on this current iteration of the engine. Yep, it looks like a grouped object has its own custom pivot. So a grouped object is going to be a little bit harder to work with. What I would recommend at this point is to have your grouped object create a static mesh. Oh, that's going to be ugly. Yeah, that's ugly. You can see how terrible that looks in orthographic view, but that's fine. Again, it's just for reference. It's not for final. Let's go to back. So we made a static mesh out of this object. Let's select our object. Let's see if we can select our pivot properly. Can't do brush editing, so let's... Oh, did it save our pivot previously? Did not. So let's go ahead and see if we can get that pivot. There we go. Set pivot here, snap. And I'm going to Control P that to make sure that that's set in. Cool. So now object's pivot is set properly. And it will always pivot on that corner. We can always reset the pivot as well. But all I need to do to fix it is probably go up in here. Let's go into orthographic view. Let's go into back mode. Now, it doesn't give us a point because it's not a brush, but we can snap it, which makes it very easy. And now that it's snapped, we can go to pivot, set as pivot offset, and go back to perspective mode. As we can see, our pivot is now set to the correct location, and we can rotate and then put our object to the ground. And we don't lose any of our perspective positioning, which is really nice. So I would have gone and set things up a little bit differently. All right. Let me go ahead and do one last thing. What's my current time? We're at an hour. That's pretty good. I think total time. Let me double check the total time for this class. I don't want this to go too long. 20 minutes here, 25 minutes here, 25 minutes, 50 minutes. That's 5 minutes. It's about an hour plus 18 minutes. So we're at an hour 20 and plus another 20 minutes. So an hour 40 plus another hour in this video. So that's an hour 40. That's 2 hours and 40. Let's wrap it up at 3. I don't want to murder you guys. There's still a lot. So let's go ahead and talk about the assignment that's coming up. And let me make sure that I'm looking at this. And then I'll do a proper outro. Let's say you're going to set yourself up to do the assignment, which is to make this cutesy little thing. The first thing I would do, very likely, is, well, we already have a box with our pivot set up. So I'm going to go ahead and set the box with our correct pivot. Cool, cool. So I want that pivot at the front left, I don't know why, or the back left, that way I can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to go ahead and set some values in here. Let's set 500 by 500 by 500. I'll move this up, and then I'm going to hit the end key. It's probably going to be a little wider than this one. Why I'll set it to like 1,000 maybe. I don't know. That's probably too wide, but I'm just ballparking. I haven't done this project in a long time because this is pretty simple, but nonetheless effective. Now, I'm going to do something that is probably not going to be a good idea for you guys to do, but you should watch me do it first. Let's select all adjacent surfaces, and we'll apply the blue, because this will be a static mesh that we replace. Okay. So in this particular image, we see we have a pointy roof that kind of has an interesting extension. You can make that a separate piece, or You can try, I would strongly recommend you make this a separate piece. As you can see, it has an extrusion here and has an extrusion there, and it has a couple pieces, but we still need to get the body of the house to be pointy. I'm going to show you how to do this wrong initially so that you understand why it's wrong. Let me go ahead and select this object here, and I'm going to go ahead and go into top view of my perspective mode. Let me make sure to press F to pay respects. I'm going to also select my floor. I'm going to group it, and then I'm going to hide it because I want to not see my floor, because I want to work on just this grid. I'm also going to go into the modes panel, and then I'm going to go into brush editing, and I'm going to select, oops, if you hit middle mouse you get a little extender. You can tell I was working Maya earlier. I'm going to control click both of these surfaces, and then I'm going to split them. And then I'm going to go back into perspective mode. As you can see, now we have a split. So if I select this object right here and I move this up, hey, look at that, I made a little point. Cool. However, did anyone notice that the actual, oh, did I close it? I did. Give me a sec to open it again. Did anyone notice that this is actually hollow? Oh, Mr. Figueroa said that you can change it to hollow, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Oh no, what happened to all my stuff? See if I can back that up. And I crashed the engine. It's going to restart. So, while I'm restarting it, talking over. Setting hollowness. Let's try to restore the selected. Oh, that's right. I didn't actually save. Whoops. No big deal. I didn't actually save anything as a level, so let's see if I can bring this back. Everything in here is still the same, so I would have to set this up again. No big deal. Let me go ahead and set that up pretty quickly. I'm not going to set up any of the default stuff that I thought I should need. This is why it's important to save. I didn't actually save any levels. I was just working. See, that's what happens. No big deal. This is why it's a demo. Okay, now everything's going to be saved. Hotkey, J, G, there we go. Do a quick build. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and that's more or less set up. I'm not going to worry about the adaptive eye or anything. You guys can worry about that, but I'm going to get to my actual demo here. Oh, set this up. There we go. Okay, so you guys saw me crash it. I'm going to save all now. So that's kind of why it's important to make sure you save your levels. But as you can see, I was just doing some demo stuff and putzing around. Let's go ahead and go to our geometry here. So you can explore this other geometry. I'll explain that here shortly. But again, let me show. Oh, let me make sure this is selected. It was what, 1,000? I think it was 1,000 on Y. And then 500 by 500. Move it up, move it down. Select this face, select all adjacent surfaces, apply. Okay. Let me hit save. Cool. Alright, save current only saves the current level. Save all saves everything that's saved down here. Save all does not save a level if the level is not currently saved. Okay, so I also need to set up my, let's do Alt-J. Let's do back. I always forget that one. G, go back. Okay. So, if you are going to have a hollow instrument or a hollow object, it is absolutely critical that you make that decision as soon as possible. Changing hollowness or changing tessellation from true to false, as you saw, breaks the BSP, and in my case, actually crashed my engine. Let's go Alt-J. Now, as you can see, I have now some outside walls that I can work with. So I'm going to go Alt-G. I'm going to go back into edit mode, brush editing mode. I'm going to select the appropriate outside wall. And then I'm going to hit Alt-J. Take a look. It looks like it's treating the outside wall. So I'm going to select this outside wall. And then I'm going to right-click and move down and select this outside wall just by control-clicking it. And then I'm going to split it. Cool. And then I'm going to go back to Alt-G to go back into perspective mode. I'm still under Alt-4, which is the modes panel, or excuse me, Shift-4, which is brush editing. I'm going to select, it's so hard to see the blue line on the blue element. Cool. We're hollow, so we can actually edit this line as well. And if we go into left mode, or one of the many modes here, we can actually set up our thickness to have a little inside. So if we now go ahead and go back into select mode, and then we add our box to our, and then we select it to subtractive. Hollow subtractive is very weird, by the way. Do you see how that works? Yeah, you'll get used to it. So hollow subtractive is very weird. As you can see, we have everything that we need. So now the rest really is just about manipulating the shapes of your mesh. So if you want to make a roof, you can start with a flat box and then do the exact same thing that I showed you, split it, and then move the entire thing up. But let me go ahead and go into some of the other toys that we have as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go into brush editing mode. The edit tool is a general edit tool. Obviously, it allows you to select our faces. This is technically not good geo here because we have an n-gon. So it's not really geometry anyways. You don't have to care. But if you want to be really good about this, what you'll want to do is you'll want to do an extrusion, and then you'll have two triangles up here. But artists, you'll know that. But again, this doesn't matter because this gets converted into a polygon, and then you don't use this over again. This is fine. This is okay for what it's supposed to be. Like it is. It's fine for what it's supposed to be. And make sure that I can apply those colors. There we go. And I don't want that. Don't know why I did that on accident. Whoops. Alright. So we've got traversable space down here. Let's go back into our brush editing. So extrude moves the geometry the way that I showed you guys earlier. Clip is weird because it creates a dividing plane and it only works in orthographic viewport. So let's go left. And this is very strange, but let's make sure I'm doing it correctly here. Let me make sure I've got this selected. Hold on. Let's see here. Let's back that up. Select my object. Come on. Let's clip. Make sure I do that here. Oh, how do I use this tool again? It's been a while. You know what? I'm going to try this with a... I think it's upset because the normal direction is a little bit weird. Let me go ahead and try it with another shape here. Let's go back into the perspective mode here, and I'm just going to make a box. I hate these tools because they haven't updated them in forever, and they don't do everything that you expect them to do. It's not as simple to modify brushes as you think. So let's go ahead and let me go to place actors here. I'm going to go grab a box, that'll be fine. Let's go into, am I in the correct mode? Yes, I'm in select mode, brush editing mode, that's correct. Cool, that's set up. Let's go into left shark mode. Let's find our square here. Let's go to clip. Start by deselecting that. So let's see if we can bifurcate this. I'm going to right click. No, it's spacebar. I'm going to hit spacebar and I'm going to bifurcate this. Select the object and let's see if it works. Oh, it's unable to compute. I don't know, let's flip normal. Let's hit split. Let's make sure it's selected. Wow, why is this not working correctly? That's weird. That should be working just fine. Let's see here. I shouldn't be splitting that, so let's see if I can get this to work properly. The annoying thing is it doesn't seem to be detecting my normal direction, which is part of the problem as to why it's not reading this. So let me see. I've got this selected. Select our box. Because the way that this works is you select your clip. All this does is you unselect your object, so you select clip, you hit space, but for some reason it's not giving me my normal direction. Because it's unable to compute my normal brush for this brush clip. That's very strange. I wonder what's going on with the clip direction that this isn't actually working properly. Let's see here. I'm only going to give this another minute before I go to the documentation because for some reason it's not working correctly. That's really strange. It can't be what I think it is. If this is what I think it is, then I'm not going to show the rest of these tools because it means that they're not updated. This is doing stuff in this engine that you generally would do in a 3D modeling program. You know what? Let's do front view. I'm going to deselect my split. I'm going to select my box here. I'm going to move it over a bit. Oh, because I don't want it selected. Let's do a front view. We'll split if your clip is selected. That's interesting because it's not giving me a normal direction. Let's try from the right view here. Okay, so don't use these tools. They're busted. Does this only really work in the right view? Don't do that to me, Epic. Come on. Okay, it works in top view here. Because once I okay, I'll show that here in a sec. Select that, and then okay. So it does work, but it's jank. Okay, let me back this up and escape a few times. Let me select my thing here. Escape. Let's go back into. Wow, I'm not gonna cover most of these tools then because some of these tools are really busted, and it's probably going to confuse the heck out of some of you guys if you have to fight with them. Because I just had to look at the documentation and it said that brush clip slicing currently does not work when slicing in various orthographic view modes. It is a current bug, and it is currently backlogged. And the last time that they updated the log to fix it was June 20th of 2019. So this is a permanent bug. Let's go ahead and go to perspective view and see what's going on here. So these tools are supposed to make your life easier. Extrude works. Clip doesn't seem to work. I'll talk about some of these. I might talk about them during the office hour. I'm going to go to the documentation and see if they've created other issues. You generally don't need these to do your project. In fact, I just thought to show them because it should be easy to show them, but apparently some of them are broken. We've got our box here, and what you're supposed to be able to do is you're supposed to be able to go into a view. Apparently it doesn't work in left. Let's try it in right mode. If you have your box selected, or if you have your object selected, if you go to clip mode, you left click the background to deselect the box, and then you hit spacebar to create a normal direction. Hitting spacebar again will allow you to create it. You could probably flip that. But once you select your object and then apply, it deletes the half of the object that is on the normal's direction, or rather where the red line is going. Let me go ahead and go back to that. We were in the right view here. So because I had it flipped, it deleted that. Let me undo that. Naturally, it would just do that. Or if we hit split, it just creates a split, which is what you'd really want to use it for, to be fair, just to make a custom split. That is awful. Why would they even leave that in its broken state? This does not work in the left viewport because the normal direction isn't visible. This doesn't work in, I don't believe it works in front either. Oh. Doesn't work in front. If it doesn't give you a normal direction, which is basically that perpendicular line, doesn't work. Let's go back. Shouldn't work on this. It works in back view for some reason. It works in back view. So hitting spacebar will designate the points. We select our object, and then if we hit split, bam, it just splits off the thing that we had before. There is literally no reason why it should not work in the other views, but it is considered a bug. The only other moderately useful tool is the pen tool. The pen tool allows you to just draw custom shapes. I'm going to set that value to the extrude depth to 100, and then with spacebar, you can make custom shapes. That's really it. I'm going to go over all of these in a future demo as well, because it's pretty weird how some of these aren't working depending on the appropriate view mode. That doesn't make any sense to me. So here's our weird little shape, and we see that we set our extrude depth to 100. So probably should have set it to 200 just to be the same as the box. But as you can see, we made a custom shape. There wouldn't be any reason why I think you would want to make a custom shape. I'm going to quickly go over the other shapes, and then we can go ahead and call this, because, wow, I felt incredibly dumb there for a little bit as to why it wasn't working. And it turns out that in 4.26, it's just not working in my left viewport, and I typically use left viewport a lot. It's just what I go to a lot because it's right in the middle and I always see it. So it's not working in that viewport, and it's only working in back viewport and right viewport. That's really strange. I apologize, guys. But you saw that it is working. It bifurcates the object. That's really all it's for. Which I imagine that means we could bifurcate this. So let's see if I can before I go further and you guys can call me a liar. Let's go back. Let's do a clip. Yep, we can do a clip. Let me escape that. Spacebar. I don't want to cut the roof off. I want to cut the bottom off. So what I'm going to do is flip that so it cuts bottom off and hit apply. Oh, I need to select my mesh. Cuts the bottom off. That used to be so remote, way more useful. I wonder why it wasn't giving me the. That's so messed up, guys. I apologize. That's a weird one. That's one I haven't ever seen. But now we've cut the bottom off, and now our building is a little bit shorter for it. But as you can see, it has some weird English with the brush that we still have in that area. Sorry. Make sure we move the brush. Come on, where's my brush in that area? If you lose your brushes, it's always a good idea to use a world outliner. Makes your life a lot easier. But now I made the house a little shorter, and you get the idea. And I showed you guys the custom shape tool, which is relatively useful if that's kind of your thing. Those are the tools that I think are the most useful. But now clip is broken, so clip isn't usable. The lathe is a little bit weird. This is all stuff that you generally shouldn't be using, because if you're going to be using this kind of stuff inside of UE4, you should just really go buy Maya. There also is a, for you artists out there, there is a modeling tools editor mode that includes a suite of interactive tools for creating and editing meshes in Editor. I have not tested this. It is brand new as of 4.26. I have seen some demos on it. It is a self-contained modeling tool, very similar to the hard surface modeling tools inside of ZBrush, if that's your thing. Everybody who I've seen use this essentially just curses it and then goes back to Maya or Max anyways. But it's there if you want to give it a shot. Is there documentation for it? There is documentation. It's not very good documentation. And because there's no deformer history, it can crash, apparently. So if you're feeling brave, give this a shot. Beta stuff can sometimes not make it all the way in. But one of my favorite tools, Landmass, basically is done and is going to be included in the future, but I just don't know why they haven't included it. Okay. So you get the idea that these tools are, I'll probably play around with these and do a demo for these on the office hour. They're not super necessary, but it gives you an idea of what you can do. I'm going to get out of brush mode and go back into select mode. And I'm going to show the other brushes, and then we can call it good. They're not necessary for the homework, but guys, you should just get comfortable working with this. The editing mode is a little bit sloppy. But stay away. If you don't feel confident, you don't have to use the editing mode. You saw me make the archway with nothing but BSPs. Didn't have to edit anything. It's just about what you can put together to make anything that you want. We already used a sphere. We get spiral staircase, which has its own steps. And yes, it can be additive or subtractive, and it's very weird. We have a bunch of different shapes. You can pick a different shape. But this just controls, this goes through all of these. So it doesn't really matter which one you pick. You can change the quote-unquote brush type to any of these inside of the brush. So if you accidentally make the wrong brush, you can change it inside of the brush itself. Linear stair is linear, curved stair is curved. And then of course we can change things like the step width, the step height, the inner radius. We can change the number of steps. We can change the height. So you can see that you can do quite a bit with these. And in this particular case, what I would do is I would select all adjacent faces. So this is where it becomes important to understand how to use the NOR and ZOR and stuff like that. Or we can select the correct one, bring a linear staircase into it, and then bring the correct mesh color into it, which makes your life a lot easier. Or we select that, I believe we can select all coplanar, and then apply. Oh, and then apply. Wait, did I not select the coplanar faces? Hold on. Select all adjacent wall surfaces. Nope, that's the wrong one. Let's select. Nope. It's not coplanar enough, is what it's telling me. Oh well. Click and drag will solve all those problems. Done. Cylinder gives you a cylinder, very similar to the sphere. You have control of its objects, or of its things like its radius or whatnot. It's always a good idea to edit the brush settings first before you do any scaling. Scaling gets scary. All right. I'll do a demo on the other tools when I figure out which ones are broken. They're not necessary for the assignment, but just remember, just get this close. The goal is to spend maybe an hour and a half figuring out how to get this to work to your guys' liking. Okay? The rest is really pretty straightforward. Yes, there is a window over here. There's a door here, there's a little door here. Yes, those are just spheres. But just have at, right? Have at. The goal being that once you actually have these shapes made, is that you can create static meshes from them, export them into Maya, use them as a reference to make your 3D models, and then bring them back in, and then once you're done and you bring your object back in, bam, you replace it with your actual static mesh, and you're done. And your blockout is done before your art is done. Blockouts typically get done before art is finished. Let me go ahead and wrap this up, and I'll do an outro video, and then I'll let you guys go for the day. Man, what a wild ride this demo was. I apologize for the mistakes. I guess apparently I'm human. Man, I'm really concerned that that was broken. I was like, wait, why is it working? It was working in the previous version. And I had to go to documentation just to make sure it was working, but it wasn't. They lied to me.